Hidden Gems, episode 25. Who is John Bohrer? Welcome to Hidden Gems, a board game podcast where we review unusual, forgotten, and underappreciated board games. We're your hosts. My name is Chris.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Ben.
Thanks for listening to our show. Well, Jason, the day has come. We've tried to avoid this. We've tried to keep him off.
Ben has made it.
Ben has
made it onto the show.
I feel like he's a legend now. The myth, the legend of Ben. We've talked about him so much, but he's finally made it on. Although he did make a brief appearance.
Yeah, you got to play Anonymous Child number 4 or whatever.
But in all seriousness, I joke. We give Ben a hard time, but it's all in love. We know he can take it. He's one of my best friends. Been a long time gaming friend / adversary. The Bill before Bill?
The Bill before Bill. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I would say.
That's probably accurate.
He's married now and, just doesn't have quite as much time for games.
Don't forget my dog. The dog, Miss Clover, is very important in my life.
I know she's special to you.
Yes.
I miss you here, but I'm glad you can still make it out a little bit. All right, Ben, since listeners don't know very much about you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then I think you also have a little special treat for us. You're going to quickly give us your top 5 games, which I think could be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up in North Carolina. Going to college, I got into economics, which led me into a career of teaching for a long time. It's really neat how I got to know Chris and Jason, and Cameron actually, was my brother Garrett, also a listener of the podcast.
Who is that guy? I haven't seen him in forever.
He got married too, and he just fell off the earth.
He's too cool to come play games anymore.
Yeah.
He has a baby and everything. But,
yeah.
I'll give him a pass. Yeah, we used to lovingly refer to you as Garrett's brother for a long time.
I was Garrett's brother for about 2 years.
He's like, who's that guy? And I'm like, Garrett's brother. What's that guy's name?
Yeah, that was me. Garrett and me growing up used to play all the board games, and Garrett was my Chris before Chris because he hated losing to me, and if I beat him, he got really mad about it. He was also 10 at the time. So convincing him to play board games with me, whether that was Monopoly or Sorry or whatever, was always a small battle. John Sink, when he first moved to Raleigh, started bringing Acquire and Power Grid and Settlers to our vacations, and our whole family would play these games. And I'm sitting here chomping at the bit like, where did these come from? And then I moved to Raleigh, and I think I met Jason before, but Chris, it's like, this guy lives way up in North Raleigh. He's got a lot of games, which was like 50 at the time. And
that's true.
Understatement of the century.
It's like 1,050 now.
Yeah. But, hey, don't give out the number. Talia listens too. A little bit more about myself. I am probably more than anybody else in the group a sport nut through and through. Love sports. Love analytics of sports. Spend too much time on like the NBA trade machine being my fantasy GM. I was upset that I didn't make the basketball GM podcast that y'all did. What was the name of that game?
Basketballs.
Basketballs, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been right up my alley. I'm laughably the most exuberant player at the table usually, throwing my pieces around.
The thrower of components.
The flourish.
Yeah.
You have the component flourish.
You have to understand when Ben perceives that he's winning, whether he's winning or not, or he thinks he's winning or he makes a really good move, he just can't help himself. He violently throws the piece down on the board because he wants everybody to see he's making such an awesome move, which has just become a form of endearment now amongst the group for sure.
Yes.
Well, on that note, tell us your top 5 then.
Top 5.
Now, before you do this, I wrote down what I thought Ben's top 5 games would be on a sheet of paper here. So we're going to see how well that I did. See how well I know one of my best friends here and his game like. I'm curious to see what you're going to say. Go for it.
In no particular order.
Okay.
El Grande, the classic.
Ooh, nice.
Okay.
Yes.
I approve.
Letters to Whitechapel.
Oh my gosh, okay. I'm 0 for 2 right now.
Manila.
Okay.
A possible future hidden gem, I've been told. It might be too popular.
I don't think so.
Anachrony.
Okay.
Ooh, wow.
All right.
And then I cheated here. This is an homage to last episode. 1v1s. This is a 3-way tie between Twilight Struggle, Hannibal, or Sekigahara.
Okay.
Sekigahara.
Sekigahara.
Yeah.
All right, so I had Manila, which I knew was going to be on your list because I know you love it. Terraforming Mars.
Didn't quite make it. It was like number 7 on there. I thought it was too cliche to put up there. This is hidden gems.
You're trying to be hidden gems.
This isn't the hotness, okay?
I get it. Twilight Struggle, Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, which we've had some pretty epic struggles in.
Yes.
And then Scythe.
Scythe was replaced by Anachrony, actually. So that makes you feel better. You had 3 on here.
Did pretty good.
Or 4, almost, of my cheat of 1v1s.
Nice. All right, Ben. Thanks for sharing a little bit about yourself, sharing your top 5 games. That was fun.
Yeah, welcome to the show, finally.
Yes.
Only took a year.
Jason.
Yeah.
It has been a while.
It has been a while.
Feels like it's been a hot minute since I've seen you sitting in that chair, and I am glad to see you back. What have you been up to?
It does feel like a while. I have to see if I remember how to do this. But yeah, I think I mentioned, I guess it was back in November was probably the last episode I was on.
3 episodes ago, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that we had a bunch of travel coming up. I'm not going to bore all of our listeners with all the details of our travel, but I think I've mentioned before that we're on a family mission to try to get to a lot of the national parks.
All of them, apparently.
Yeah, we'll see. Every time I look at the list, I'm like, man, there's a lot in Alaska. I don't know if we're going to get to all those. Our latest trip was to California, and we went to 4 parks on this trip, which was a lot of fun. We did Pinnacles, the Channel Islands, Joshua Tree, and Death Valley.
Wow.
And all incredible parks. I'll talk through each one like a tiny little blurb just to give people an idea of what these are. So Pinnacles was the first one that we went to, which most people probably have never heard of unless you live in California or you know a lot about the national parks. But it's a newer national park. I have to say this is a hidden gem of a national park for sure. I was not expecting to be all that amazed by it. It's a really small park, and it's kind of just in the middle of nowhere. I would say it was one of my more favorite of the 4 that we went to.
Awesome.
Just these huge granite rock formations sticking up all over the place. We did a 9-mile hike there.
With 3 kids?
With our 3 kids.
Woo!
They crushed it.
Jude, too?
He did it.
Wow.
I will say I had my doubts.
How old is Jude again?
He's going to turn 6 in May.
Holy smokes, dude.
Yeah, they got excited about it, and they knocked it out. And it was one of the coolest hikes we did. Then we went down to Ventura and went out to the Channel Islands. So the Channel Islands are 4 or 5 huge islands off the coast of Santa Barbara. Beautiful islands, huge sea cliffs that you can hike along. Nothing out there. There's no infrastructure. There's like a dock and the remnants of an old 1800s ranch that nobody uses anymore. Left there and went to Joshua Tree, completely different environment. It's amazing that all 4 of these parks are in the same state. We just don't have context for that, being from the East Coast.
We've got like 2 in North Carolina.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome park. Tons of rock formations that we climbed around on. Got to see all the Joshua trees, of course. And then we went up to Death Valley, which is just otherworldly.
You mean went down to Death Valley?
No, up to Death Valley from Joshua Tree.
I think you're talking elevation.
Elevation, yeah, elevation. Lowest point of elevation in the continental U.S. Just otherworldly environment and so much open space. Being from the East Coast, I guess if you grew up on the West Coast, maybe you have that context for just the amount of open space that's out there.
Vast
but like
emptiness, yeah.
Being from the East Coast where all we see is trees everywhere,
Right.
like, it's just incredible landscape. So, Chris, while you were traipsing around fake Star Wars land in Disney World,
Okay.
we went to the real Star Wars land.
That's awesome.
So, for any Star Wars nerds out there, a lot of shots of Tatooine were filmed in Death Valley. So, we got to go to a couple places that were used in the filming, and that was pretty cool to see.
That is cool.
So,
very cool.
Did a bunch more hikes there. Hiked around a volcano. Hiked into a volcano, which was a terrible idea because it was very difficult to get out. But yeah, it was definitely an amazing trip. The kids had a blast. Anybody who's not from that area, definitely get out and explore them. They're all very, very worth the effort and worth the experience. So
awesome.
Had a great time. All right. Well, as always, it's good to be back for this part too. We have a cocktail tonight, so tell us a little bit about the cocktail. It's very brightly colored this evening.
It is indeed. Tonight we're talking about John Bohrer, and John Bohrer is known for his winsome Cube Rails game, so I decided to do a train theme type cocktail. So this one is called the Blue Train, which is the best board game color there is, obviously. So to make the Blue Train, that's 2 ounces of gin, 3/4 ounce triple sec, half an ounce of blue curacao, which gives it its blue color, and then 3/4 ounce lemon juice, which I would probably back off on a little bit. It's a little bit citrusy.
It's a little puckery.
Yeah, a little bit. Maybe half an ounce, but that's it. It's Blue Train.
All right, well, in the vein of train games and cube rails, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, tell us a little bit about John Bohrer. Since we're all wondering now with the title of the episode, who is John Bohrer? So tell us a little bit.
I don't think I can explain to you how difficult this was to do. I feel like I was in college again, researching this guy.
A term paper?
Yeah, exactly. There are thousands of posts on BGG. Well, not thousands of posts, but thousands of comments within posts on BGG about this guy. He's a fascinating character.
Mainly about the Age of Steam controversy.
A lot of it is on the Age of Steam controversy, which we will briefly talk about tonight. But a lot of other stuff, too. He's just a very interesting guy. A bit controversial, I would say. So I'm going to do my best to explain it. I would encourage...
he's the bad boy of board games, is what you're telling me.
A little bit. Yeah,
okay.
A little bit, I would say. So John Bohrer, his BGG ID is 336. Also known as Matthias Burt, David V.H. Peters, Eddie Robbins, Benny Seaman, Harry Wu, Martin Wallace, amongst many, many others, actually. So he goes by a lot of different pseudonyms. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. John says he started board gaming in 1965, and his entry game was Diplomacy. It should be noted that...
Sounds like you made a lot of friends.
It should be noted that he was around 9 to 10 years old at this time. He was playing Diplomacy, okay? That gives you the idea. Yeah.
Vicious.
He moved on to other Avalon Hill and SPI games for there, and then he states that he went to college at Carnegie Mellon after his sophomore year of high school in 1973. Smart guy.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, he's from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
He dropped out of gaming until about 1988 because he said he became much more preoccupied with girls and dating. So board games kind of fell to the wayside for a while. Then he got back into it in 1988.
Sounds like the inverse of my life.
That's right. He describes himself as an engineer and a scientist, and he says in multiple places that he can't discuss his work, whatever that means. I guess it's secret or confidential or something. I don't know.
So not a future guest on Hidden Gems.
Yeah, he can't talk about what he does, apparently. He started Winsome Games in 1994. I think it's important to note, if you're not familiar with Winsome Games, it's very much a boutique-style publisher. They focus solely on trading games with incredibly minimalistic components. These games do not look good, okay? John Bohrer is much more focused on mechanisms and gameplay over the appearance of the game. Interestingly, he said in 1995 he was going to give up the business, but then he started getting game orders from Germany, actually. They found out about his games. Apparently the German people really enjoyed it. So he got a bolus of money from Germany, and then he decided he was going to fly to Essen, Germany, and then he fell in love with German board gamers, and I quote, due to their love of smoking, Braunschweiger, which is a sausage, apparently, and beer.
Sounds like a man's man right there.
That's right. He said at that moment he resolved to stay in board game design and go to Essen every year of his life. Another interesting little tidbit about Essen, I thought. Randomly one day as he was walking around Essen, he asked if he could sit down and relax at a booth because he was getting tired, because Essen is huge, apparently. I've never been, but it's a huge convention. And he heard some people talking English at a booth, and so he asked if he could just hang out for a bit. And it just so happened to be Warfrog's Essen booth. Jason, who made Warfrog?
Martin Wallace.
That's
right?
Martin Wallace. Yeah. That's right. That's how they met, actually, was just a chance encounter. That he just happened to sit at their booth at Essen one day, which is interesting. All right, so why the pseudonyms? So instead of trying to summarize this, I'm just going to read some of these responses from John Bohrer because I think they're interesting and funny. This is what he says about pseudonyms. I've been asked by a friend to say a little bit about my pseudonyms. For my first few train games, I used my own name. Then the Train Gamers Association, headed by Heather Barnhorst and bankrolled by Mayfair Games, worked to suppress my games, going so far as to create a restricted list with my games on them. Simply put, my games could not be played at TGA tournaments. Well, then I started using my Martin Wallace pseudonym right up through Age of Steam. Martin was happy about it. He wanted to be a famous game designer. I did not care for any of that ilk. Then I did an 18XX variant for Rail Gamer magazine. I couldn't use the Martin Wallace pseudonym because everybody at the time knew that Martin never played 18XX. I discussed the problem with one of my mentors, Professor Henry Chang, the man who taught me switching theory in graduate school. Henry was a proud Taiwanese American, and Harry Wu came up as a pseudonym. Harry Wu it was. After Age of Steam fight with Martin, I used Harry Wu again for a certain style of game. For others, I used David V.H. Peters, a combination of 4 of my winsome guys in Pittsburgh, Dave, Vince, Hudson, and Peter. So those guys in his game group, basically, is where that came from. For their style of games, I used Eddie Robbins, my dear brother-in-law who passed away in 1992. Benny Seaman was my old girlfriend's cat. Matthias Burt is a name that brought up nothing on a Google search. I could see who was talking about that game just by typing the name in on Google, so it was a fun experiment. I have no need to see my name plastered all over the place. The only places where I care that my real name listed is on the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the U.S. Copyright Office, my passport, my driver's license, and the deed to my house. I have been using pseudonyms for decades now and will continue to use them for games and other creative works like magazine articles. Someone has a problem with this. It is their problem, not mine. Have a nice day.
I'm saying Mark Twain. That's a pseudonym.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want the recognition. That's understandable, right?
Yeah, but it is interesting that he uses Martin Wallace as a pseudonym, which usually when you use pseudonyms, it's not real people.
Right.
Right? especially when you're talking about intellectual property. I think this is ultimately what ended up getting him in trouble, if you know what I mean.
More on that later.
So I mentioned his relationship with Martin Wallace, and there's definitely some controversy regarding him and Martin's relationship as it relates to Age of Steam. I think we have to discuss this because this, I think I mentioned in a prior podcast, is about the closest thing we have to a real life board game soap opera drama in board game world.
Yeah, I think in the Martin Wallace episode, we punted to this episode.
We did.
For this discussion.
We did. So I think we have to go there. So again, I'm going to just hit some of the high points directly from the horse's mouth here because I actually had a hard time paraphrasing it. So I'm just going to read what John has to say about the issue. I suppose with all the hubbub going on at BGG about Age of Steam, I should say a few words. I don't enjoy this, but it is time, I expect. People have been lied to for far too long. People have been led to think that my father and some powerful law firm pummeled poor Martin Wallace in court. Actually, it was quite the reverse. Mayfair Games hired an excellent patent and trademark attorney to fight for Martin Wallace. Larry Rosny told me that they spent over $35,000 in legal fees. I spent nothing in one. How could this be? Well, all Martin Wallace had was his execrable Brummy Rails game. I had 2 years of heavy design work records outlining my creation of Age of Steam. Mayfair did not know this when they paid Martin Wallace big money, but they sure found out later. Martin Wallace's contribution to Age of Steam was changing all the red cities to blue and the blue cities to red, with the result that the rules examples made no sense in the first Warfrog printing. I simply could not lose this case in federal court. Facts are paramount, proof is everything. It came as no surprise to me when Mayfair later posted that they would never produce another Martin Wallace game. One night in a rambling drunken BGG post, Martin Wallace revealed that I had created Pampas Railroads and put his name on it. It is true, Martin Wallace wanted to be a famous game designer back in the 90s and I did not. He was thrilled that Pampas Railroads was lauded as a great game and everyone thought him a game designing genius. He was getting the limelight he craved so much. I just enjoyed that so many people liked the game and more people were getting into trade games. So yes, I use pseudonyms. I don't want any limelight, and pseudonyms are great. I am Harry Wu, David V.H. Peters, Eddie Robbins, and others. Game designing is easy for me, and I can do it in different styles. I used the Martin Wallace pseudonym for his early train games up through Age of Steam. I made sure, though, that every copy of Age of Steam had my copyright. I may eschew the limelight, but I protect my intellectual property. I'm sorry if I have made anyone unhappy with the realization that they were played for a fool by Martin Wallace, but I have no choice. It is unfair to Rick Seward to let this charade go forward. He is a fine gentleman and an honest, ethical person.
Seems pretty well argued.
It does.
But it's only one side of the story, so.
It's true. So, Martin Wallace's rebuttal. I regard the new edition of Age of Steam as stolen property. This is from Martin Wallace. There was never a real license from Winsome to Warfrog. The license from Winsome was a favor to John to help big up Winsome in the same way that John published Prairie Rails with my name on it, even though I never designed it. The game was never submitted to Winsome for publication. It was always designed to be a Warfrog game. John was paid to develop it. That is all. Even if Winsome did own the license, then there should also be a contract between Winsome and the designer. There is no such contract. Even if there was one, the fact that Winsome have paid me no royalties for the design would mean that they were in breach of contract. I'm sure John is never tired of telling people in private about the money I owe him, but that's all in his head. For some reason, John cannot remember it. Winsome has never had to risk money publishing Age of Steam, yet wishes to claim it as its own design. Warfrog took the risk to publish it, and yet is not regarded as the legitimate owner. Fred are in receipt of stolen property. There have been enough discussion of the ownership of the game to warn them of the issues surrounding it. Instead of contacting me about this, they chose to publish it without my knowledge, even though we have been in regular contact about other matters. As far as I'm concerned, I want nothing to do with Fred or Fun again, and I'm doing my best to terminate the existing contracts I have with them. Sorry for the ranting, but I'm a bit brassed off about the situation. It used to be that companies did not behave in this manner, as the public reaction would bankrupt them. Today it seems that some companies believe that it's okay to rip designers off. So I'll just point out at this point in time that those were direct statements, but not complete readings of the direct statements. I've edited a lot of that out for time. I just tried to hit the high points. So not everything is there, but enough for you to get the idea, basically.
This is obviously a huge controversy, and I have not read all of the BGG history and debate around this. I'm hesitant to stick my toe into it, but I will say it's interesting reading those two statements that it seems like Martin's side of the argument is far more based on the contracts that were or were not signed around it, and not so much about who actually designed the game.
Right.
So if the debate is really who designed the game, at least based on those two statements that you read, it doesn't really seem like there's much debate there. It seems like John is the one who designed the game. There's just some beef over who owns the rights to it.
Yeah.
Right?
I think you're right.
In my mind, a completely different subject.
Yeah, I have a strong suspicion as well. So let me go ahead and say, and I think we're all saying this, nobody knows. Nobody knows. Like I said, there are literally thousands of comments about this on BGG. But my suspicion is that John designed Age of Steam with some help from Martin Wallace. He probably assisted him. It was
Artwork,
probably
maybe.
Bordering on a collaboration. John probably did most of the work. But Martin actually put up the financial risk initially because Winsome was not in a place where they could. And so Warfrog took on that financial risk to print the initial copies of Age of Steam, and I wonder if that is what makes Martin feel like it really belongs more to him than to John, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But who the heck knows?
Which is understandable because it's a valuable IP now, right?
For sure. And I don't think any of them realized how valuable it would be.
Yeah.
All right, last thing, John Bohrer's favorite games. If you go into BGG, so John Bohrer's been banned from BGG since 2014.
Huh.
For what reason, I do not know.
Once again, the bad boy of board games.
That's exactly right. But if you look at his profile, he's rated 6 games, and they're all 10s. So I would assume that those are his 6 favorite games, at least up until 2014. Those games are 1844 Swiss, Fresco, Miscellaneous Game Accessories, which isn't even a game. It's like a BGG entry for components.
That's like a catch-all for a whole bunch of stuff on BGG.
Weird. Railways of Europe, which is a variation of Railways of the World by Glenn Drover. Stalin's War, and then String Railway.
Oh, man. Oh, no.
Oh, no. Giving String Railway a 10 makes me really seriously reconsider what we're doing on here, but I guess maybe he knows what he's talking about. But that game's terrible, folks, in my opinion.
Maybe there's some secret genius to it that we just missed entirely.
There might be. But anyway, that's John Bohrer. All right, so we're going to get into the games here, but real quick, one disclaimer before we do that. I think we just have to say this on the front end before we dive into these games. We have little to no experience with Cube Rail games. So if we sound like complete schmucks while we're talking about these games and we don't know what we're doing, we sound very noobish, that's why. Okay?
Yeah, we gave these our best attempt, obviously, and we've played some 18XX here and there. But yeah, we're far from Cube Rails experts.
For sure. All right, let's get into the games.
Let's do it.
Santiago Villanueva anxiously awaits the first train ever from Madrid. 100 kilometers away, the brand new railway will be a huge boost for his business and will mean major benefits for his small city in the rugged mountains of Spain. His personal investments in the railroad will bring substantial dividends over time, and he's delighted with the expansive progress he has seen so far. Viva success!
Nice pronunciations, Ben. You're drawing on your Argentine background.
Soy un porteño, if we have any Buenos Aires listeners out there.
Awesome. All right. Iberian Railways, published in 2017 by Winsome Games, and more recently by Rio Grande Games. At the time of this recording, its BGG ranking is 8,571. Designer of this game, obviously, John Bohrer. So, interestingly, I had played this game before we did this episode, and I had forgotten that I had played it. Years ago, when the game first, well...
That's why you beat us every time.
I guess so.
That's it.
I guess I drew on that one play that I played back at Ravindra Prasad's house, actually. Back in 2017, we actually played the Winsome version of this game, and I hated it. I actually had this game rated in BGG, and I didn't realize it as a 4.
Ooh.
Okay?
All right.
At that time.
We'll see if it's improved.
All right, brief rule summary for Iberian Railways. In Iberian Railways, the players are laying their railways track cubes all throughout the Iberian Peninsula in an attempt to score points in the game's 7 different scoring objectives. Like most Cube Rails games, the player's turn in Iberian Railways is fairly simple. Players can choose from one of 4 possible actions on their turn with the stipulation that players cannot repeat the same action 2 turns in a row. The first action is to start a railway. To do this, the player will place anywhere from 1 up to 8 cubes on different contiguous hexes on the board, creating a railway in their color. The cost to lay track increases exponentially with the number of cubes placed, and some additional costs may be incurred if building occurs on river or hills hexes. So, for example, the cost to lay 3 track cubes is $12, while the cost to lay 8 track cubes, significantly more, is $52. One important rule to make note of regarding building track is each hex on the board can have at most 2 track cubes in it at any one time. It's important to note that the players start the game with no money, so in order to lay track, the players must take out loans. What's a good train game without loans? Each player can have up to 16 loans at any one time during the game, with each loan awarding the player $5. The second action the players can take is the expand action. This allows the player to add cubes to one of their already established railways in any way they see fit. The third action allows players to merge 2 or more of their existing railways into one large conglomerate railway through the placement of cubes. Placement of track cubes in the above 3 actions is crucial, not just for scoring points, but also for generating income. There are numerous demarcated hexes spread all throughout the map that will award differing levels of increase to your income if you have a track cube on that location. So, for example, each town that you have a track cube present in will increase your income by $2, while having one of your track cubes present in Madrid will increase your income by $6. Income generation is important, as this will decrease your need to take additional loans, obviously, and will also help you pay your loans back if that is something you're trying to do. The fourth and final action is purchasing a business interest. Many of the larger cities on the map have a card assigned to them with a dollar value, anywhere from $3 to $5. If you purchase a business interest card for the value printed on the card and manage to place a track cube in that card's corresponding city hex, you will move your income marker up that many spaces on the income track, effectively increasing your income for the remainder of the game. Once a player has taken an action, they collect their income. They'll pay interest based on the number of loans they currently hold, and then they will have the option to pay off a single loan for $6. If at the end of a player's turn they have no unplaced track cubes remaining in front of them, the game ends. Players will then score points based on how well they did in each of the different scoring metrics. A player or players will score 1 victory point for each of the following: moving their income track marker the farthest on the track, having the longest contiguous run of track cubes, being present in the most towns, being present in the most minor cities, being present in the most major cities, and having the most business interest cards. The player or players with the most cash on hand at the end of the game, however, will receive 2 victory points instead of 1. And that's basically it. Most victory points wins the game. And that's generally how you play Iberian Railways.
That's it.
How was that?
Not too shabby.
Not too bad? All right, introductory question for this game. I think we have to start with the victory point scoring for this game because, in my opinion, it is just totally unique and very unusual. I think in modern board gaming, we've grown very accustomed to games where we create an engine that spews out a lot of points, and we usually score anywhere from 40, 50, 60 points at least, usually more in a lot of games, right? We're just used to that kind of thing.
Yep.
Well, this game throws all that out of the window and says, hey, here are 7 scoring parameters, and 6 of these will only give you 1 point, and 1 of them will give you 2 points. Try to find a winning strategy. In the games we played, usually the winning score was usually around 5 to 6 points.
Yep.
Okay? So, my question to you would be, how did you feel about this scoring mechanism?
Yeah, so I don't want to jump too far into my cons for the game. I have mixed feelings about this, but the concept of it, I love. I love the concept of narrowing down the focus and distilling all of that point scoring down to its core, right? I think that's really clever, and I think it's needed in more games, right?
Sure.
This whole, you score points for everything, the point salad that people complain about all the time, right?
Right.
They have their place, and I enjoy those types of games a lot of the time, but I thought that this was a really interesting way to frame it. It makes you think about the game in a different way, so I enjoyed it in that respect.
I thought it was unique and different, but
sure.
I found it difficult because I'm not a Cube Rails player. Chris won both times by taking an insane amount of loans out, which I didn't see as an obvious strategy, but it might be how you play the game. I go back to, hey, if Chris only had 10 games and this was one of them, we played it over and over, I'm sure there's a million ways you can win this game, but I don't know that I have the time to invest in that.
Okay. I have to say, for me personally, I found this really fascinating and kind of a breath of fresh air for me personally, just because it takes typical board game conventions and turns it on its head. And that's kind of what we're about these days, right? We're just looking for something different, and this is different. Playing a game for 45 minutes to an hour and scoring 5 points is not normal, okay? And this game does that to you. But what's interesting about it is the way that the game scores with these very few parameters. You are totally invested in what your opponents are doing at all times. And I think that's one of the greatest pros of this game. You must be looking at what your opponents are doing because you have to be willing to pivot at any moment to try to either abandon a strategy that you know is not going to work or try to opportunistically pick up available points that you see nobody is going for, right?
Yep.
If I'm going for longest route and I can see that Ben is just beating me in that and he's not going to give it up, I'll abandon that, but I'm like, nobody's really picking up towns here. I'm going to start picking up towns, right? It really causes you to very closely examine what your opponents are doing and then reevaluate your strategies constantly throughout the game, and I really enjoyed that part of it.
Once again, if we went with, hey, we came over, this is the one game we're playing at, and we play it 3 times, I think this could be a great game for that type of setting because you play it so differently each time. It's the reaction. Yeah. That's pretty neat, and that's unique. I just know that the first time I played it, I crushed the engine building of income, and I came in second to last because I built this engine, but I
didn't do any of these other things to score points. You've been talking a lot about money, Ben, and I'm glad you did because I wanted to bring this up. And Jason, I'll ask you, how did you feel about the approach to money in this game? I think it's interesting that for this particular scoring parameter, he gave 2 points, right? The only one that's worth 2. Is if you have the most cash at the end of the game. But an interesting strategy is just to say, the heck with cash, I'm going to take a bajillion loans and try to build stuff. What did you think about that dynamic?
Yeah, before I get to that, I think, Ben, you touched on a point of playing this game a lot. And I do think that this is not the type of game that you can just pick up once or twice a year.
No way.
And kind of expect to really get the most out of it. Because it's the type of game where I feel like you have to play it over and over and over again to explore all these really nuanced strategies that occur in it. And to that point, what you're talking about is one of those, right? I think that 2-point money you have at the end of the game, point scoring opportunity, is a bit of like a, I don't want to say it's a trap because it's obvious
right.
it's 2 points, right?
If
you manage to get it, and 2 points in a game where you can win with 5 is not anything to shake your head at, but it's almost like a trap, right? Because if you have other players in the game, and Chris, you did this in one of the games that we played, who are abandoning that entirely, they're going to be way better off in terms of income than someone who's trying to save their money every round, right? Yep. Because what that ultimately boils down to is you're trying to conserve your cash every round, which means you're not dropping 6 or 7 or 8 cubes at a time. And if there's a player who's doing that, who's like, forget paying off the loans, I'm just going to take whatever money I need to lay as many cubes as I can, it's going to rush the end of the game because the game ends when somebody runs out of cubes.
Right.
Which means everyone else is strapped for time. So you might have tons of money, I might have tons of income, and I might be debt-free, but it doesn't matter because the game's over.
I think it's interesting that you say rush in the end of the game. I actually did this in 2 games to great effect. And I wasn't really trying to rush the end of the game in so much that I referred to a word that I used earlier. I just pivoted. When I started those 2 games, I was also trying to make a run at having the most money, but I began to see a few turns in that I wasn't going to be that person. And so if you realize it's not going to be you, you're just doing the math, and I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be the person with the most cash. I was just like, screw it. I'm just going to start taking loans like crazy, and I started going for different things, right? Trying to do different stuff. I think other people, when they see that, if they know they can't win it, they need to just abandon it and kind of follow suit, right? But I think we're so programmed in train games to be like, I can't have debt. I can't have loans. I must pay my loans off, right? And this game kind of is like, well, you don't really need to, right? Which I think is interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought because I think that you keyed into that pretty early of, I need to pivot. This strategy is not going to work. I need to pivot. And I don't think everyone else picked up on that quite as quickly. And so if you're the one who picks up on that, you're going to win this game because that's how the game works. What will be interesting, I think, is if you play the game more and everyone starts to follow that pattern of like, okay, well, I was going for this. Now Chris pivoted and he's going for that, so I need to pivot and go for this over here. It would start to balance out a little bit. And I don't know. We never got to that point in playing this game.
I think that's what the game is.
We never got to that point of expertise playing this game. So I'm not exactly sure how that would play out, but it might make it a little bit more interesting.
As a noob to cube rail games, being the 4th player on one of my plays, I didn't realize, hey, build like a 7 or 8 rail right now. Because what got me, I had a nice rail laid out, and Chris ran out the turn before me, and I come in dead last because I don't get a turn. And it's like, hey, you have to take out this bigger loan.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a natural thing for me. I should have just been like, I'm dropping 7.
Sure.
So I think Ben alluded to it a little bit earlier on, and I mentioned it early and then kind of punted till now. And this could be some of our inexperience with Cube Rails games. But I think one of the biggest struggles for me in this game was keeping track of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to look at the board and be able to analyze 7 different victory conditions and calculate how everyone else at the table is doing on those conditions, right? Because you're talking about, well, if your strategy's not working, then pivot, right? Great. I would love to pivot if I could calculate 28 different scoring parameters in my head instantly and be able to figure that out, right? Visually, it's difficult to look at the board and not miss something.
Sure.
It always rubs me a little bit the wrong way, and you can say, well, it's my own dumb fault for not noticing somebody doing something, right? But it always stings a little bit when someone wins a game because it's like, oh, well, they were doing this thing and just nobody saw it.
I remember the first game, I'm trying to get longest rail. I had a move where I built 7 and 8, which was your 2 maxes, and I realized I have to individually count your cubes to know that it's a viable strategy. You have to get up and individually count someone's cubes on a board.
What do they have the potential to still do based on the cubes in front
of
them? Yeah.
Do I need to switch my move? Which was kind of hard. I thought what was going on in the game was really neat. Me actually knowing what to do. It was very opaque.
I think for me, the one thing that really bothered me the most about this game, my one major con, I would say, and I've mentioned this as cons in other games we reviewed on here before that aren't QRL games, is this game has no variable setup at the start of the game.
I was wondering if somebody was going to mention it. I was about to.
Yeah, I think you have to, right? And chess doesn't have variable setup at the start of the game. I'm not saying it's a deal breaker for a game, but the problem with this game that I think it causes is based on where you fall in turn order. When Schwazi or whatever your randomizer picks you, you're going to fall in a certain opening strategy based on what people are doing before you. So, for example, if Ben places cubes on his first turn and he's before me in a certain part of the board, I'm like, okay, Ben's going for minor cities to start the game at least. Jason places over here. Okay, Jason's going for towns, clearly, because that's kind of what's over there. Now I have to go over here, right, and do this thing to start. Because if you, from the go, try to get confrontational with somebody, you're going to cannibalize each other and somebody else is going to win, right? So I think that lack of variability kind of forces you, at least initially, down an opening strategy that I don't love. Now, once the game gets going, pivoting starts to occur, but I don't like how the game starts.
Right, yeah, I had the exact same thought, and I think that's why I was saying earlier, if everybody understands that pivot strategy, I think this game just becomes a game of who pivoted best.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's what it is.
And that doesn't appeal to me as much for some reason. When I first played this game, I was like, oh man, this huge map, all these cities, all these ways to get income, because I was focused on income to my own detriment, right? There's so many different directions you can go. You can put cubes down anywhere you want, and I love that freedom of the map.
Oh, yeah.
But when it all boils down and it's like, well, if everyone was playing this game to the best of their ability and everyone understood it through and through, it would really come down to turn order and who pivots at the right moment. That takes something away from the game, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's a bad game. I think that when I realized that, it was like, oh, I'm not as excited about it as I was when I played it the first time. That's maybe leaning a little bit into my final rating. So maybe I'll just carry on through and wrap it up with final rating, unless you guys have other stuff to add.
I'm good. Yeah, let's move into final thoughts, Jason. Go ahead. Get us going.
Yeah, so I think I said most of what my final rating is right there. I was really excited at the beginning of playing this game. That idea of the victory points being distilled down to just 7 key things was really cool to me. The freedom and the openness of the map was really exciting. And it seemed fun the first couple plays. As I played it more, the cumbersome nature of trying to keep track of what everybody else was doing and then just feeling like every time I lost, which was most of the times, it was just because I missed something that was happening on the board or I just didn't pivot at the right moment. It took something away from it for me. I wonder if playing it more, it would continue to go down because of that lack of variability in the setup. So ultimately, I settled on a 3 for this.
Okay.
I think there are other styles of this genre that I enjoy more than this particular one. But yeah, I settled on a 3 for this one.
Okay. Ben, what do you think?
I felt pretty good about it going in. I like train games pretty well. It was different. It was tough.
Yeah.
This is an elephant that you have to eat one bite at a time.
Mm-hmm.
It left me really sour on one play. The fact that you go out and I have a play that...
Yeah, you were to my left that game.
I was to your left.
Yeah.
I was the last player. And I'm like, I think I can do this, this, and this. And I've done pretty well. And it's like, Chris has $1 just enough to lay everything out, and you don't get a turn.
And I had like 15 loans.
Yeah, you had all your, like, you couldn't take another loan. And it's like, I didn't even get a chance to play. I felt like that sudden ending kind of soured me. I'd play it again. It's quick. You're not asking for a huge commitment.
It's pretty
not asking for a huge rule commitment from somebody. I gave it a 3. I'm willing to say, unlike Jason here, I feel like with more plays, you could make this a 4, possibly.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was between 3 and 4 with the tendency to go down from there. You're at like a 3 with the tendency to go up. So
I like it. So for me, we've been talking a lot about the in-game scoring in this game, and I think it's just because it's so fascinating, and I think, to be totally honest, for a lot of people, it's jarring. I think that's a really good word for this. I think it just jarred people because we're just not used to it. I think probably a big reason why it's rated in the 8,000s on BGG and why I initially gave it a 4 out of 10 on BGG is because it jarred me. It made me uncomfortable because we're not used to that kind of scoring. However, I would say now, I guess since I've played more games and seen more stuff and just played more train games, I guess, this scoring mechanism just fascinated me. I really found myself enjoying the subtle turning of the dials and the knobs, trying to figure out those ways to just barely get ahead, because in this game you will just barely get ahead. But finding those places to pivot, like Jason was saying, and not just pivoting once, but multiple times. I think it's not just a game where you pivot once. All throughout the game, I'm thinking, okay, do I leave this and do I jump on this? And then a turn later, I'm thinking, okay, do I start trying to go for this because I thought he was going to go for that, but it doesn't really look like he's doing that now. You're constantly reevaluating, how am I going to just score that one extra point I need to win? And I found it very fascinating. I enjoyed the game a lot. I'm giving it a 4. I think I could see this actually even climbing to a 5 for me with more plays, if I could find people to play it, because I don't think anybody really liked it but me. But I think it was a fascinating design, and I would love to play it more.
You've suckered me into playing games I'm still questionable about, so,
That's all right.
So I'm here for it.
All right.
All right. Those are our thoughts on Iberian Railways. Chris, how hard is this game to find?
Not hard. So there are copies of this game available on Noble Knight for as low as $35. It's a little bit lower than MSRP, actually. Like I said, the Rio Grande edition, which is the one I have, is a pretty good printing of this. If you want to go through Noble Knight, we would definitely appreciate it. Like we've mentioned before, they're one of our sponsors. If you use our discount code HIDDEN22, or that's a new code now for this year, HIDDEN22, you can get 10% off of your order. There are only 3 copies on BGG right now, so it's a little bit rarish on there, but like I said, it is available on Noble Knight and some other online retailers as well.
You want to do the, and those are our thoughts?
And those are our thoughts.
On Iberian Railways.
Oh, sorry.
Railways.
And those are our thoughts on Iberian Railways.
Nice.
Players represent the founders of early railroads in the southern United States in the era before the Civil War. They compete with other players to found companies, expand their lines to new cities, connect with complementary lines, and generate dividends for their shareholders. The player who best manages these goals will be the winner in the highly competitive world of early railroads. Golf Mobile in Ohio. All right, Golf Mobile in Ohio. Published in 2008 by Winsome Games, designed again by John Bohrer, currently ranked on BGG 4,553. So, in keeping with tradition, even though I've been gone for a couple episodes, Chris always gives me the most difficult possible game of the 3 that we do to try to explain the rules to, so I will do my best here.
It's only fair. Oh, before you get into the rules, real quick, I meant to tell you this. Sorry, Jason. This game was recommended to us by James Geist of the Dads on a Map podcast. Said that we should review this game on the Guild.
Cool.
So thanks, James, for the recommendation. We'll try to do it justice.
Good to hear from those guys again.
Yeah.
All right. So this game takes place on a map of hexes representing a portion of the southeastern United States, minus Ohio for some reason. Roughly. The primary mechanism in this game, very differently from the previous one that we talked about, is auctions.
Yeah.
So we're auctioning railroad company charters throughout the game, and winning one of these charters enables the winner of that auction to use the money paid as their winning bid to build or expand rail lines on the board in order to score victory points by reaching cities and connecting into lines of differing colors. More on that in a second. So in this game, there are 8 railroads initially available to be chartered, but as rails are built on the board, an additional 15 charters likely will become available. And each of these railroads consists of a main charter, the president's share, and a single common share. So on a player's turn, they're going to do one of 4 things, which is really 3 since one of the options is passing. But passing can be strategic, so more on that later too.
Absolutely.
The 3 actions possible are auctioning a railroad charter, auctioning a common share, or performing a presidential expansion, so long as the player doing that action holds the president's share of a given railroad. Auctions are standard English-style auctions with bids starting at $0. Players bid higher or they pass and may not re-enter the bid after passing. After winning an auction, either for a charter or for a common share, the winner of the auction will use the money that they bid to build track for the railroad belonging to the charter or share that they purchased. Each rail cube placed on the board costs $3. Only 1 cube can ever be placed on a connecting or planes hex. So this is important. This is different from the previous game that we talked about that could have a max of 2 cubes on every hex. Here you can have only 1 cube, so that leaves a lot of room for blocking and other things. On cities, however, any number of cubes can be placed so long as there's not more than one of the same color.
Right.
The player will then place that charter or share in front of them, place a cube on it to mark which color it's represented by on the board, and that share will then provide that player with income in the future. So how does income work? So whenever a common share is placed up for auction, there's a tracker that will move. And whenever that tracker reaches 2, so every second common share that gets auctioned, dividends will be paid out. Now, charters pay out $5 to the player that holds them, unless the corresponding common share for that charter has also been auctioned, in which case the value of that charter becomes $3. Which can be devilish. Common shares always pay out $3, and it is possible to own both the charter share and the common share for a total of a $6 dividend payout when dividend time rolls around. That's kind of the basics. Now I'm going to try to attempt to explain how rails get built on the board. So this is important and kind of confusing. We debated this at least a couple times playing this game because I think everyone who played it got confused at least once.
Yeah, we messed it up a couple times, yeah.
So at the top of the board are 6 rows of colored cubes, and each row has a different number of total cubes. So for example, the top row of green cubes has 32 cubes in it, whereas the next color down, yellow, has only 26, and so on, until reaching the bottom row, which is purple, that has only 6 cubes in it. So whenever a player is about to place track for a new railroad charter, they must use cubes of whichever color of cube row currently has the most cubes in it. This is the weirdest part of this game, I think. Right. So there are going to be multiple railroads on the board that are represented by the same color of cube, and these railroads cannot merge.
Right.
They will always be separate. So let's talk about why the colors of the cubes matter. So a player is going to score a point when they place track for a new railroad for the first time, simply because they chartered a new railroad. They'll also score a point every time they connect a railroad into a city. Each city is worth 1 point, with the exception of Atlanta, which is worth 2. Lastly, players will also score a point each time they connect a line of a certain color to a line of a different color. The game ends immediately after the turn in which the first cubes are placed from the purple row, or the bottom row of cubes, or if all players pass consecutively. And that really is essentially how you play Golf Mobile in Ohio. There are a few additional rules in there that I'm leaving out for time's sake, but that's essentially how you play it. Did I miss anything, Chris?
Not crucial.
All right. So there are train games out there, 18XX especially, that include auctions as part of the game.
Yeah.
There are not many that I know of where auctions are the primary mechanism of the game. So how did you guys feel about that in this game? Did it still feel like a train game, quote unquote, to you? What did you think about it? Auctions being that primary mechanism.
I thought the auction did take a lot of the game, but it was definitely track laying, making a track, making connections was where the points were at. The auction was how can I best take my money and maximize points per dollar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm really glad you went before me. So I'm a little bit different from you. I agree. I think it's a train game. To me, though, I saw this game more primarily as an auction game, and the track laying seemed more secondary. I'm not saying your opinion is wrong. I think it's interesting. We just saw it a little bit differently. To me, in this game, the more I played it especially, getting the auctions right is critical in this game. Mostly because of the fact, if you haven't figured out a way to generate an income engine for yourself by winning auctions and acquiring shares that get you more money to win further auctions and further shares and lay more track in the future, you're dead in this game.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
You're dead. However, it's still an auction game, and if you pay too much for a charter or charters, then you're also dead. Because you've overspent money and you don't have enough to show for it. So again, like any good auction game, you have to figure out where is that perfect valuation of what's the right amount to pay for this thing and when do I need to let it go and try to pick up another one and where I can still stay afloat. And then after that, the track lane, while important and for scoring points, felt more secondary. For me, I was like, I have to get these auctions right or I'm going to lose this game.
What I found fascinating about this auction is that in most auction games, the key to the game is figuring out how to value what's being auctioned.
Yep.
Right. In this game, I found that the valuation of things fluctuated a ton based on the track laying.
Yes.
Right?
You mean like what cubes were up to be placed?
Right. Based on like
The color.
the track laying and the availability of tracks to meet one another and which color cube is going to be used for the next charter that goes out created these super, super narrow windows of opportunity where the value of something might be vastly different based on what the condition of the board is and what's currently up for auction.
And that's what Ben was talking about that points potential. Depending on all those factors, more points could be at stake in a particular auction, for sure.
Right. And another thing about auction games is usually, in a lot of auction games, it's like, well, if you manage to just rack up a ton of money and have that buying power, then you've got all the power for a while, right? And while that's true in this game, like any other auction game, like you have all that power, your power might be for nothing.
Yes.
If all of the opportunities on the board have been sucked up already, right? And I thought that was interesting, right? Because the first couple times we played it, I was like, oh man, I'm just going to save up money, and then I'll really be able to make a huge play. And that's true, but only if that huge play still exists.
Mm-hmm.
And it might not, right? Or it might just have passed by. The big opportunity might have just gone by, and now the remaining opportunities are going to be piddly or whatever. So I thought that was interesting too.
I thought it was fascinating. So this little, it looks like a bar graph on the top, which is what is choosing what color you can put down.
Yep.
Was a fascinating mechanism because in one of our games, I had more money than Chris and I just took it and it was the dumbest play ever. I was like, wait a second, I could have let Chris have that and then I would have had the other color and had so much freedom because I was the only one with money left. You had this beautiful auction and timing going on that you could let other people do things, and then if they created an opportunity for you, you had to have the money and be ready to strike.
Yeah, and I think, too, you're alluding to the fact you look for those point-scoring opportunities, but there's just great opportunity for shenanigans in this game, too.
Yeah.
Jason might have a great point-scoring opportunity on the board, and I can see that. And he's to my left. Jason has like $35 and I only have 12. I can take that charter that I know is super valuable and can score a ton of points, and I can put it up for auction, but pick one that's like in the corner of the map, right? Mm-hmm. And now I've taken all that point scoring potential with those red cubes that can make all those unique connections and score a ton of points, and I put it way over in no man's land and forced somebody to buy it, or I can just pick it up cheaply, right? There's just all kinds of room for all this really mean, interesting play when you find yourself in the position of not having a lot of money. Because usually in a lot of games, the person who has the most money has the power, like you were saying, Jason. Mm-hmm. But even if I don't have the most money, I can still put a share up for auction that kind of sucks, you know, and force you to have to deal with it. Or I can just take it for cheap, right? Interesting.
I think it might be helpful to give a little bit of context on how this, I explained the rules around these colors and how they switch, but maybe give a little bit of context on how that actually impacts the gameplay. When you're trying to make these connections, green is the most plentiful color, right?
Yeah.
So the first couple railroads that come out are all going to be green. And so they can never meet each other because they're all green and you're never going to score off that. But as soon as red comes into the game, now it's like, ooh, now if I get a red railroad, I can go meet all these green ones that are already out there. Right. As soon as yellow comes into the game, it's like, ooh, yellow can now go meet red and green in all these different places, right?
More points, yeah.
So I think that's just helpful context maybe to help people process in their brain why these colors matter and how it plays out as the
I
game
think
develops.
it's a good thing to point out. And going back to my example, I was saying now with that clarification, which I think is helpful, the point I'm making is if I'm short on cash and there's that railroad that just came available that can meet red, green, and yellow, and I can't make that happen because I'm the poorest person at the table, I start a railroad that's in no man's land that can't meet any colors.
Something I found fascinating we did was we got down to the last play. We played it out, but then we did Monday morning quarterbacking of what we could have done and how we could have stopped said player from winning.
Mm-hmm.
We came up with the thing of, well, it's whoever has purple last, or whoever gets to put purple out, or whatever, that type of thing. I think the person that can do that got that income 3 turns ago and made good auctions in the middle of the game or the beginning of the game that build the machine to allow them to do that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about
Maybe.
this, Jason, because I think you have thoughts about this. I know you've said this in the games before, but I'll be brief here, and I'll say with Ben that I think that I agree. I think that the final cube color placement, those purple cubes that come out last, are only 6 of them. I think that they're more an indicator of who was winning the game rather than a deciding factor of who wins the game. Or in other words, like Ben was saying, the person who was able to place those put themselves in a position of strength to do that because they outplayed everybody else up to that point. Agree or disagree, Jason? What do you think?
I think that's true, but it's also easy to look back in hindsight at the end of the game and be like, well, of course that person played better to be able to be in that position. I think that there is, though, some degree of timing element, like a timing turn order. I don't know if it's turn order or if it's just income position. I don't know that you can say that somebody who ended up in purple 100% put themselves in the position for that, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's completely luck, that somebody just happens to fall into the position where they get to place purple and that's why they win. But I'm not 100% sure that it's 100% strategy either. Yes, that person built up their income and they played well up to that point to be in that position. But there's too much of a turn order element to this game for me to say 100%, well, it's all because that person deliberately planned every step they made up to that point to be in that position. I don't think I could say that with confidence.
But I'm not sure what turn order has to do with how much money you have at the time the share is put up for auction. If you put it up for auction, but I have $60 and everybody else has $50, I'm going to win the share regardless, right? And I had the money in hand to win that. What does that have to do with turn order?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that comes back to that arms race for like, having the most economy. It always bugs me a little bit when there's this one move that if you happen to be the person who can make that move, you're likely going to be the winner. But whether you planned and played well to be able to do it or not, there's something about that end game. It almost makes it sort of like a race.
All right. Should we...
Yeah, we've been going back and forth on pros and cons, I think.
I think we have,
probably
yeah.
Just wrap it up
Let's
here.
wrap it up. Ben, start
Put
us
butter
off
on
here.
it, baby. I wrote 4. I'm giving a 5.
You changed your mind?
I changed my mind.
I've done that before, with talking it out.
I do that all the time. I'm not sure if I should admit that, but
I feel like I wanted to fit in with everybody because I hear this every time I listen. I really felt great. Talking about it more makes me want to put it down.
I kind of want to play it again, too, honestly.
And the time I lost and didn't play well, I was like, well, I tried to do this and I tried to force timing and I just played it all wrong trying to do something cute.
Yeah.
But the auctions are neat. It's a pretty quick game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not committing 6 hours to this train game. I'm committing like an hour and a half, I think.
Yeah, at most.
Which is a great time for something with this much meat on the bone. I'm giving it a 5.
Nice. Yeah, for me, I think I made it clear on this podcast before, but I love auctions. Love them. And this game is auctions on top of auctions. As I mentioned earlier in Jason's introductory question, in my mind, this is an auction game first, and then track building added on to that. If you get the auctions wrong in this game, you are done for. And I like that. Figuring out those valuations. Now, taking that and adding on top of it, interesting track lane shenanigans and running cubes out and building lines in crappy areas and ways that you can mess people over, chopping people's presidential shares. Fun. I thought this game was just fun. I really love this game. I am also going to give this game a 5. I think it's excellent. Looking forward to playing it more.
Wow. Yeah, I would agree with you. This game is an auction game through and through.
For sure.
I think it took me a long time to be able to make my brain think about it in that way because I see tracks and trains on the board and I'm like, oh, I need to go make all these trains go all over the place. Right? This is a deviously tricky auction game that just so happens to be about trains. I think it's fun once you wrap your head around the whole color meeting mechanic, and it can be somewhat unforgiving if you happen to get off track in that arms race of economy building aspect that it has. This game has a lot of evolving strategy, which we've talked about a lot on the podcast. The more we've played this game, I think we talked about it a lot with Cavum and a few of the others, the more we play it, the more we're uncovering these strategic opportunities.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there's still more there. I am also going to give this game a 5.
No, really?
Despite all of my complaining.
Did you have 4 written down?
Maybe.
Did you change your mind? I knew it. You got peer pressure.
We talked him into it.
You
No,
wimp.
it is not peer pressure. It is, I think it's, the more we've talked about it, the more I'm like, man, I do kind of want to explore this more. I was terrible at it. I don't think I came close to winning this game a single time we played it. But there's something about it, unlike Iberian, right? We talked about Iberian, where I think there are those same things there. I don't think we uncovered everything there was possible to uncover in Iberian Rails.
Yeah.
But there just wasn't a spark there for me that's like, I want to go play this more and I want to go uncover
Figure out what that is, right?
There is with this game.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it's an auction game. And
I was
love
going to
auction
say,
games.
you love auctions.
I love auctions.
So, Chris, you ready to kick Jason's butt some more? I'm ready. If
After
you
this
are,
recording?
I just need to go
Put it
play it
down.
with somebody other than Chris. But yeah, I give it a 5 as well. I think
Awesome.
this is a great game.
Love it.
All right, where can we find Golf Mobile in Ohio?
Again, copies available on Noble Night. Again, for $35. You can find this game on there as well. Also, 6 copies available on BGG and also available on a lot of other online retailers. I think when Rio Grande reprinted this, they did a lot of these Cube Rail style games, not just John Bohrer, but a lot of other train games, Trans-Siberian Railroad, stuff like that. These are just available right now, and I say grab them, pick them up, give them a try.
Cool. Well, those are our thoughts on Golf Mobile in Ohio.
Rich merchant families travel along the Silk Road looking for profitable bargains. The players act as merchants, trying to marry into these families and take control of their businesses. Who will establish the most relationships and will be the winner in the end? Samarkand.
Nice.
Yeah, short and sweet.
Find it on a map.
All right. Samarkand, Routes to Riches, I might add. So that's the complete title of this game. There's another game on BGG, Samarkand, by Sid Saxon, actually. This is not that game. This is Samarkand, Routes to Riches. Published in 2010 by Queen Games and Piotnik. At the time of this recording, its BGG ranking is 1,873. The highest ranked game we've reviewed so far, at least according to BGG. Designer of this game is John Bohrer. However, if you look at the box cover, it says it's designed by David V.H. Peters and Harry Wu.
Nice.
So apparently he felt the need to use 2 of his pseudonyms for this particular game.
2 of his multiple personalities.
Maybe it's because he felt like it's a particularly fantastic game. We'll see. All right. Brief rule summary for Samarkand. So we've talked about hidden train games before on this podcast, and Samarkand is definitely one of those games. In Samarkand, the players buy into or take ownership of family tiles, which are basically shares. And once a player is in a family or a railroad, that player can place camels or track on the board in an attempt to meet up with different families on the board and reach good markers populated all throughout the board. The game board depicts the Middle East, Northern Africa, and Western Asia and is divided up into numerous, very irregularly shaped spaces. Some of these map spaces will be populated with good tiles and the starting locations of each family, which again, these are the railways, basically, while other spaces are blank. There are 10 different merchant families in the game, with each family having 2 family tiles or shares and 12 camels, again, track. Finally, there is a deck of 33 goods cards that correspond to the 33 unique goods tokens that are placed on the board during setup. On a player's turn, they can do one of 2 things. Pretty simple. They can either marry into a merchant family, again, that's like buying shares of a railroad, or expand the trading route of the family, laying track. When a player chooses to marry into a merchant family, they must first pay the cost associated with that particular family, placing that money in the family's treasury, and then they take one of the 2 family tiles for that family. After this, the player will then draw 3 new goods cards from the goods deck, keeping anywhere from 1 to 3 cards, making sure that they don't exceed the hand limit for the game. That's the first action. When a player takes the second action of expanding a trade route, they take 1 or 2 camels of a single color that they are married into, and they then place them adjacent to any previously placed camels of that color on the board. If the player places a camel on a goods space that hasn't yet been visited, they take that goods token from the board, and it will award them 1 victory point at the end of the game. If any player is holding that corresponding goods card, they have the option of playing it to the table at that moment for 3 coins, or they can continue to hold it in their hand for end-game scoring. More on this later. If the player places a camel in a location with a camel of a different color, and this is the first time that those 2 colors have met, a new trade relationship is established. All players that own a share in the family that initiated the meetup immediately receive 3 coins, while all players in the family that was met up with receive 1 coin. This is not trivial, as coins can be used to marry into more families, but also each unspent coin is worth a victory point at the end of the game. In addition to this benefit, the player that caused this meetup to happen will take a handshake token from the 2 families involved in the meetup, and each of these tokens is worth a point at the end of the game. The game will end once every family has been involved in at least one meetup, or a single family has been involved in 5 different unique meetups. Once the game ends, the players will look at the cards still in their hand and score points for camels that are present on those goods locations. The players score 4 points for each camel belonging to one of their families in that spot, while they will only score 1 point for a camel if they are not a part of that camel's family. That sounds weird. I should point out here that every space on the board can at most hold 2 camels, so the most you could score for a card at the end of the game would be 8 points, if you were a member of both of those camels' families. The players will add up the value of their cards, plus a victory point for every goods marker they collected, plus a point for every handshake token they collected, plus a victory point for every unspent coin. Most victory points wins the game. That is generally how you play Samarkand.
Joining up camel families.
Camel families. Hopefully this was clear in the rules, but we're going to talk it out more here. It seems in this game that there are 2 primary point scoring mechanisms at play here. Either by making connections with your family to resource locations that match the cards you are holding in your hand, or by having different families meet up on the board for the first time. My question to you guys would be, did you feel like these scoring parameters were balanced? And did you feel like that these options were enough to keep you interested in the game? I think this is an interesting point to start off with, because we played this game with many people in our game group, and boy howdy was this game divisive, particularly on this point. So what do you think, Jason?
Was for sure divisive. Yeah, I think we had a lot of debate over whether the cards meant anything, right? And I think that's because the first few times we played it, it just so happened that at least one player, if not more players, were heavily focused on going after those meetings, right? Mm-hmm. And they're valuable. If you are the owner of the family, or married into the family, whatever the theme is, you're getting $3, 3 points, just for initiating the meeting. Then you're getting 2 more tokens, which are also worth a point. So that's 5 points just for initiating that meeting, right?
Yeah.
And 5 points is big in this game.
Can I jump in real quick? I'm not going to stop your thought, but I just want to add something.
Yeah.
But if you carry a caravan into a goods location that matches a card in your hand, that's 4 points, plus another point if the goods token is on that spot, which is also 5 points.
True.
Okay? All right. Continue.
Yeah, I'm not arguing one side or the other here. I'm just kind of explaining the debate. Mm-hmm. So those meetups are valuable.
Sure.
Right? And I think because people were going for those, it also speeds the game along, right? Because the game will end whenever either one family has run out of their meeting tokens or all families have met at least once, right? So that speeds the game and makes it maybe a little bit more difficult to get the full value out of your cards, right? But yeah, that was basically the debate. In my view, having played the game a couple times, I think they are fairly well balanced, right? We saw people win using both strategies. And I mean, 8 points for a card is huge.
Yes.
Right? So if you manage to get a couple of those, which I think Bill managed to get like 3 of them or 4 of them in one game, right?
Bill did not have a single meetup that he made happen in that game. And you had like...
I had a ton.
12.
And I think I still won.
You won by a point.
But I won by a point. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, those 8 point cards, if you manage to do it, it takes a little bit more planning because you have to manage to be married into both families that have camels there, because there's a max of 2 camels per space. I don't know if you mentioned that. And you have to ensure that that meetup happens. So that was a long-winded response trying to give more context, but ultimately I think it is balanced based on what we saw after having played it more.
You use this language, and I'm going to quote you, but I know what you meant, but I think it's interesting the way you said it. You said people going for meetups, going after meetups. In this particular game, I think it's interesting in the way that the board is laid out, with some exceptions at the start, which I didn't go into in the rules with water. generally speaking, especially once you get into the game, you can't go after meetups. Okay? And the reason for that is that if you move towards somebody to try and meet up with them, you're not going to make it to them, and then they're going to meet up with you.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't go after meetups. If you're meeting up with people, that's because somebody at the table moved themselves in a position towards you to where you could then meet up with them.
I have a counterpoint to that, though. I'm not disagreeing with you entirely, but it's interesting. There are so many similarities in this game to Golf Mobile in Ohio, just from the two-share thing to the focus on the meetups and everything. But one major difference in this game is that all of the railroads, essentially, all of the families are on the board at the beginning of the game and can be met up with.
Sure.
Whether they're owned by someone or not.
Okay.
And so I think that factors into what you're saying a good bit, and I think that's part of the frustration that people were seeing is that you can go for meetups with families that have not been bought yet.
But how many families are that?
Because they're just sitting on the board. I mean, red, blue,
you
brown.
Hit 2, 3.
There are quite a few.
3 at most. I get what you're saying, but again, I think that's 2, 3 or most. I would say for me, in the times that I play this, I was accused of being one of the meetuppers. You know, Chris is just winning because he's going after meetups. You can't fault a person in a game for taking points if they're given to them. Right? Like,
well, certainly not.
If you're going to move near me, I'm going to meet up with you, right? And I think the more that we played it, we started to realize that spatialness of the game where we're like, well, I'd like to go this way, but maybe I shouldn't because then he'll hook into me and score points that way, right? The point I'm making is I don't think meeting up is a dominant strategy because I don't think you can just go all in on meetups because of the way that the board is laid out, if that makes sense.
I agree. So I would say if you had two people on both sides of the board maximizing that strategy, you hypothetically could get the game over very quickly. My other thing was, it was hard for me that you had a differentiation of how much they cost, the families, from 3 to 6. And that's you giving up points.
Yep. Money's points, yeah.
And the problem with that is you don't get more camels. You just get a perceived better location or more central location. And to me, a lot of times, I started not being able to buy those, I felt, because I was giving up 6 points. Now, I might have been able to get it back, but I would need 3 turns probably to get those points back, and it wasn't going to come. I'm just saying that really deterred me a few times because I was scared that people were going to end the game so fast.
Well, and that's the thing. I don't think you can buy into families late in the game. I think you have to do it early. The earlier you buy into families, the more point potential you have because the more likely you are to be involved in meetups. Remember, if somebody involves in a meetup and you're a part of that family, even if you weren't the one that did it, you get paid, right?
Sure. I think what Ben is saying is that variable value of them, unlike Golf Mobile in Ohio, and I'm going to keep going back to this because there are so many similarities. In that game, money is only a means to an end.
Sure.
In this game, money is the end.
Points.
Right?
Yep.
And so if you're going to spend additional money to go for one of those more centrally located families, you have to make sure that you're going to get something out of that investment. And I'm not sure, maybe we weren't leveraging them correctly, but I'm not sure we saw in our games where going for some of those more expensive ones paid off as much as maybe it seems like they should.
I mean, I think it certainly could. I think it depends on your card draw, right?
Yeah.
Well,
if your goods resources are all around red and blue in the center of the board, you buy into red or blue. I think that's...
Here's my problem with that. So you would have to get that draw on the first draw. Because you only... I feel to buy into them at a 6 rate, double the amount of the outside board, I would need something around them on my first draw.
Like your opening hand?
My opening 2. I feel like I would want something on my opening 2.
Most people draw families on their first 2 actions of the game.
I know, but I usually draw where my cards are.
The point I'm making is, let's say you get a crappy distribution of cards on your initial draw. It may not have been clear from the rules. When you buy into a family, you draw 3 new cards, and then you can discard, not just from the cards you just drew, but from cards that were in your hand. So there's a built-in...
Sure, but that's when you buy into a family, right? So if you're
which
talking
is what
about...
you always do on your first action.
But I'm saying if you buy pink on your first action, okay, you've got 2 cards and you're not anywhere near pink, okay? You draw 3 cards. There is only about 6 that are close. So
why would you buy into pink if you didn't have any cards near pink?
I'm trying to say that you have to have the cards.
See, we're getting fired up.
I'm trying to say that you... My thing is that I would need 2 cards in the vicinity of one of the center ones
Sure.
on my first draw.
No, I don't think so. I think you can buy one of the fringe ones, and then after your first draw, if you draw a good hand, you're like, oh man, 2 of these that I just drew are near blue. On my second action, I'm going to buy into blue, right? I think that's totally reasonable.
I'm not disagreeing. I don't have a horse in this fight. Wait, is that the right phrase? Horse in this
Horse in the fight?
Race?
Horse in this race. Dog in this fight.
Dog in this fight.
There we go.
I'm not saying it's a deal breaker. I'm just saying that it makes it a little hard to go after those. That's all I was saying.
Yeah, it could be an inexperienced thing, right? I did find it interesting that investing more into them, you don't get more camels. You are putting more money into the treasury for that family, which you use to put more camels out, but you're still limited, right? You can only put 1 additional out. I don't think we ever saw somebody want to place 2 camels and not be able to because the treasury had run out, right?
Yeah.
The treasury mechanic almost seems like it just shouldn't exist, in my opinion. I guess if you're the only person who ever invests in a family, it would start to hamstring you at some point when the initial treasury runs out, because you never get that second bump of money coming into the treasury. But it's really just an investment strategy. If I know that I can make more than $6 off of paying $6 to get into this family, then I can go for it. I think we've covered everything I had.
I have one more thing to say.
That's a first.
I think this is an important point for me. I played this game several times. I think I played it probably more than anybody, probably 5, I think. And
well, we play at your house, so that would make sense.
That's true. Yeah, so what really took this game to the next level for me was when I started to realize that, yes, maximizing points on your turn is critical in this game. But how can I get my opponents to score points for me on their turns? That, I think, is a really important part of this game that I think we were just scratching the surface of for such a simple game, and we weren't quite getting, and we started to figure it out the more we played it. So I'll give a really simple example. We've been talking all about how meetups are so important and the coveted meetups, and you want to be the person doing meetups. They're important. I'm not saying that, but just for an example. So let's say I'm part of yellow and I'm part of green family, and Jason is part of yellow family as well. And I build green family onto a goods location. Let's say it's good number 18 or whatever. And I have card 18 in my hand. So that's great. I just scored 4 points for that. But I've left Jason open to have a meetup with me now. He can build yellow into green and score all these points for himself. I don't care, because by building yellow onto that goods location as well, now I've just scored another 4 points because I'm also part of yellow. Not to mention, I got 3 coins for the meetup. Exactly, because while Jason gets 5...
I'm your card got 8, and you got 6.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a lot of symmetry.
That's what I'm saying.
It's beautiful in that way. I'll say that.
You're finding opportunities. Yeah, I'll let Jason have that meetup, but he just scored me points, and now instead of me trying to make that meetup happen, I can do something else on my turn and find other ways to score points. I think finding those little opportunities, whether it be buying into families, let's say I can see Jason is in green and he's getting ready to meet up with 2 families and there's nothing they can do to stop it. I'm going to buy the other green share. And now every time he meets up with him, I get 3 points. Awesome, right? I think those little things of seeing opportunities to score points on other people's turns is really what makes this game much better for me, personally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, well, why don't you kick us off on final thoughts then? I don't think you've started off.
I haven't. This game was just so fun to talk about.
Lots of debate.
There was. This game was so divisive, and I love games like that. This game was just so good. I love this game. I really do. Every single turn in this game is so important. I feel like I've been saying that a lot. I think it's the cube rails thing, honestly. You just don't ever zone out in cube rails games when it's not your turn because they're so interactive. Everything that people are doing on their turns is so important to you. And I love that in this game. And for me, the 2 things that really took this game over the top and made this my favorite of the 3 games were that figuring out how to score points on other people's turns that I just talked about, I thought was so fun. And this game, in contrast to the other 2 we talked about, gives you something to think about from the start of the game. Remember with Iberian Rails and Gulf Mobile in Ohio, we talked about there's no variable setup. There's no direction really early. You're just kind of doing stuff and then pivoting as appropriate. This game, you get that hand of cards. And that is what you form your strategy around, at least initially, into what families am I going to go into? How am I going to try to spread on the board? I loved everything about this game. I think about it all the time. I think it's great. This game is a 6 for me.
Ooh.
And I feel confident in saying that. I think the game is fantastic. I think you should try it. It's awesome. It's short. It's on the lighter side, I would say. It is not a complicated game. But if you like those low to medium weight games with quicker turns, you owe it to yourself to try this one, I think.
Cool. Yeah, this one is definitely the simplest to pull out and teach. It has probably the easiest theme on the palette for a more family-oriented play. There are definitely decisions to be made here. The first time I played this game, I absolutely hated it.
You did.
I was mad at this game the first time we played it. I just wanted to go home. I was like, this game is dumb. I don't even want to finish reviewing this for the podcast. But the more that we played it, and I'm going to be careful here because it was not because I won one of the plays.
But you did,
right?
yeah.
I did win one of the plays, but I think some of the things that you're talking about, Chris, started to become more apparent. I don't think this one matches up to the same degree as Golf Mobile in Ohio in terms of strategic opportunities. And so for that reason, I settled on a 4 for this one. But I think it has the potential to go higher if I played it more. So I think it could get into 5 territory with more plays. I definitely enjoyed this one after that first play. I do have slight reservations on the initial card draw. You do have the ability to play with that throughout the game, but I think that having a very advantageous card draw
like any game
early in the game, I think can make a difference.
Yeah, that's any game, right?
But yeah, could be any game. So solid 4 for me.
Nice.
I liked it, and it was good. I think one key thing we're hitting on here, if I've got people that are in your board game group and love really intricate, super difficult, grinding decisions, Golf Mobile in Ohio is your game.
Mm-hmm.
If you want quick decisions, this game's great.
Yeah.
In that way. And I give it a 4. I'd play it again. Here's the thing. You're not asking me to commit much.
Yeah.
And for a short family-style game, it's a 4. For a family style, I'd almost give it a 5 if I had to play it with my family. But for me, personally, it's a 4.
Yeah. It's easy to get out to the table and play with people who maybe are looking for that next step game. I don't think this is a starter game for people. You know, that's more Ticket to Ride stuff. But next step, great for that, and still has enough decisions for people who are more seasoned gamers to stay interested. And I think that's a unique trend that I think we're seeing in a lot of these Cube Rails games is the more I've talked about them here with you guys and fleshed my own thoughts out in my mind, I think we're just kind of scratching at the surface of these games. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
I still just don't think we really understand everything that's going on here with these games. I think the more we play it, the more we see things, you know?
To be honest, I was a little let down. I was coming on the Cube Rails game as a complete noob to the group. I've been playing board games for like 7-8 years, and these are my first 3 Cube Rail games, and that's what I got to talk about for an hour and a half.
Yeah, you were brave to do so. I'm telling you, folks, there was some weeping and gnashing of teeth when we were playing some of these games, and it just wasn't Samarkand either. I'm telling you, this one is just like getting punched in the gut, these games, because they're so different. If you want something different, if you're tired of the same old, and you just want a new experience, you may not like them, but they're at least worth trying, I think. They're just so interesting.
Chris was worried he was going to lose half his game group after pulling these down.
It's true.
So the real question is, hey, Chris, where can we get this?
Nice segue, man. So, again, copy is available on our friends at Noble Knight. You can get it there very easily. 11 copies on BGG as well. But that's about it. Outside of those, this is an older game. Like I said, it was published in 2010, but there are several copies available on Noble Knight if you want to give it a go. I highly recommend. And those are our thoughts on Samarkand.
Well, thank you for joining us for this 25th episode of Hidden Gems. It's hard to believe it's 25 already.
I know, right? 1 year anniversary coming up.
That's right. If you like what we're doing here, please remember that's a huge help to us to give us a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice. Or you can always follow us on one of our many social media platforms. Check out the BGG Guild if you want to interact with us or share a game that you feel is a hidden gem. And if you're so inclined, please consider supporting the show over on our Patreon. Until next time, I'm your host, Jason.
This is Chris.
And I'm Ben.
Thanks for listening.
This episode of Hidden Gems, number 25, was recorded in Raleigh, North Carolina on January 25th, 2022. The original gang is finally back together. Join us again in 2 weeks when Chris, Cameron, and Jason take a look at a trio of games that are best at 3-player count. Hidden Gems is produced and edited by Chris Alley, Cameron Lockey, and Jason Yanchuleff. Our Board Game Geek Guild is monitored and managed by honorary Hidden Gems team member Ghidorah. Our show's logo was illustrated by designer and artist Caitlin Nieto. Check out her work on Instagram at It's Caitlin Nieto. We would love to hear from you. Feel free to join the discussion on our many social media accounts. You can find us on Facebook at Hidden Gems Board Game Podcast, Instagram, hiddengems.podcast, and Twitter at Hidden Gems Board. Disagree with one of our reviews? Have something you want to say about one of our games we discussed today? You can also make your voice heard on our Board Game Geek Guild at BoardGameGeek.com, guild number 3874. Once again, thank you for joining us on Hidden Gems, and until next time, fellow gem seekers, enjoy your games and enjoy your search.